Useful reading strategies. This PowerPoint will go through different reading strategies you should use anytime you're reading to help you comprehend. The strategies include predicting, questioning, clarifying, summarizing, connecting, and visualizing. As you go through this PowerPoint, you may recognize strategies you automatically use. Challenge yourself to identify the strategies you are not currently using and add them to your repertoire of strategies. For this class, you'll be required to use these reading strategies. You will show me that you are using these reading strategies every time you annotate an article using Diigo. Another time you might show me how you're using these reading strategies is in your double entry journal that you will be doing for Of Beetles and Angels. Although you're required to use these strategies for my class, the ultimate goal is that the strategies become automatic, and no matter what you're reading or for which class you're reading for, you'll use these strategies to help you become a stronger reader. Predicting is a very natural strategy to use. One of its benefits is it activates any prior knowledge you have on the subject. Before you begin reading, preview the text. This means look at the cover, look at titles, look at headings. Familiarize yourself with the layout and organization of the material. Then use the information you've gathered to make an educated guess about what the material will cover. I like to think of predicting as evidence plus prior knowledge. Evidence plus prior knowledge equals a prediction. It is a mistake to believe that asking questions shows your weaknesses. When it comes to reading, asking questions actually shows you're a very strong reader. Strong readers question constantly. When reading fiction, a reader may wonder what is going to happen next, or question why a character made a particular choice. When reading research, it is important to question the methods of the research, the bias, and the variables in a study. When you question as you read, your thoughts may start with, I wonder, does, what if, when, etc. Some readers find it helpful to make a list of their questions as they read, and then occasionally review their questions to see if any have been answered. Pausing to clarify is another strategy strong readers use. Instead of skipping past unknown words, good readers highlight them. If the word comes up in the text again, the reader may decide it's worth taking the time to look it up. Strong readers also stop to reread when the meaning of a long sentence gets lost. Sometimes clarifying and questioning go hand in hand. It's important to be aware of when you are in need of clarification. This awareness is called metacognition, or thinking about your thinking, being aware of your thinking. Every reader has different strengths and weaknesses. Personally, when I read nonfiction, I may pronounce every word correctly, but I have to try extremely hard to stay focused and process what I'm reading. Often, when I read a page of nonfiction, I get to the end and realize I have no idea what I just read. I do not have this problem at all with fiction. Since I noticed my weakness is nonfiction, I purposely began using reading strategies when I have to read nonfiction. The most useful of these strategies is summarizing. Depending on the length of what I'm reading, I stop after each paragraph or at the end of each heading and summarize. Using the phrase, I just read about, ... If I notice my mind is wandering, I force myself to stop and recap or summarize what I read more frequently. If I find I cannot recall what I read when I stop to summarize, I know it's time to reread, clarify something, or ask questions so I can more fully comprehend. There are three types of connections readers commonly use. A text-to-text connection is when what you're reading reminds you of something else you recall reading. For example, while reading Of Beetles and Angels, I made a text-to-text connection with The Things They Carried, a book that is also about refugees. A text-to-world connection is between what you're reading and a real-life event. For example, a few years back, I was reading the book Tornado to my fourth graders. The students could connect the terror the main character in the book felt to the footage they were seeing on the news about the flash flooding and sinkholes that were happening that spring in the Duluth area. Lastly, text-to-self connections happen when an event you're reading about directly relates to an experience you've had. Making connections gets your brain to open a pathway to information you've already stored, and it makes it easier for your brain to retain the new information you're learning. The stronger the pathways are between information, the more knowledge you'll retain and be able to later recall. Good authors try to create a movie in the reader's minds by using imagery and figurative language. Unfortunately, this does not always happen in writing of a more technical nature. When that is the case, it's important to slow down enough to digest what you're reading thoroughly so that you can see what the author is saying. Some information is so detailed and complex, it may be worth taking time to sketch or create a diagram to represent what the author is explaining. When you work with the information in more than one way, information is better remembered later. SQ3R, Survey, Question, Read, Recite, Review, is a strategy that incorporates a bit of all the strategies discussed so far in this presentation. This video clip will review the strategy for you.
To the SQ3R reading technique. The SQ3R reading technique was developed in 1946 and continues to be one of the best active learning skills a student can learn, develop, and incorporate into their academic studying. Too often, students take the time to read something like a textbook chapter and afterwards realize they cannot recall much of the information. This is because reading by letting your eyes glance over the printed word is known as passive learning. You are waiting for the information to present itself. Unfortunately, that rarely happens, as the brain is not focused on achieving any specific learning goals. A better alternative is active learning. This is when a student interacts with and utilizes information as he or she receives it. Active learning takes much more effort on the learner to interact with the text. Ultimately, though, it provides far greater rewards to the student. What is SQ3R? It is a 5-step process designed for a student to learn information much more carefully and completely. The 5 steps are survey, question, read, recite, and review. The full textual reading is sandwiched between pre- and post-reading activities. The first pre-reading activity is the survey step. In surveying, you will quickly look over and note common elements of a chapter. These elements are often set off from the actual text in different fonts, colors, or can be found in the margins. These provide a framework or sketch of the information contained within the actual paragraphs. The time it takes to survey a chapter varies, but should be done rapidly. The steps to surveying are: read the title of a chapter, skim the introduction, read headings in the chapter, look at visuals, notice how many pages, read vocabulary words, check for a summary and read it, notice unique things about the chapter. Let's look at these steps in detail. Read the title of the chapter. This is found at the beginning of the chapter and is distinguished by a larger font or color. Skim the introduction. The introduction is representative of the chapter as a whole and usually sets the stage for themes and ideas. When skimming, do not read every word. Instead, look for names, dates, and any unusual verbs. Read headings and subsequent first sentences. This is because in many cases, the first sentence of a paragraph contains the main idea. However, you may find that the authors of your textbook generally place the main idea in the middle or end of a paragraph instead. Sometimes the main idea is implied or not stated at all, At this stage, however, you do not need to concern yourself with actually finding the main idea. If it is present, great. If not, don't stress. Look at pictures and read the captions. The pictures illustrate important people, items, or events. They can give an idea of scale or scope and can really help the information seem more relevant. Take a note of how many pages are in the chapter. Sometimes students feel that chapters are endless. This will help you budget your time to pace your reading as well as get an idea of where the beginning, middle, and end of the information occurs. Notice vocabulary words and read them. They are often set off in boldface or colored font. For any vocabulary words that do not appear with definitions, look at the glossary, which most textbooks provide at the end of the book, just before the index. Most of the time, these vocabulary words are new to the reader, or clarify which of the many definitions are being used in the text. Check for a summary and read it. This is the chapter in a nutshell, as the summary concisely contains all of the important information in the chapter. Finally, notice any other unique things about the chapter. Sometimes a textbook will include charts, graphs, related readings, or special sections. If it is set off from the text, it is there to supplement additional information and bears attention. The survey step is concluded. If you are new to this, you may have found yourself trying to read every word or getting distracted by reading the paragraphs. You still have one more step before the thorough reading, however. This step is the question stage. Now that you have a rough idea of the chapter's content, you are going to prepare goals and purposes to your upcoming reading. Turning subheadings into questions does this. The questions will guide your reading of the information and give you something immediate to do with it. Question words are who, what, when, where, how, and why. Try to use logical questions. For example, the heading, "The War Begins," can be turned into, "How did the war begin?" Washington and the Continental Army can be turned into, "What was the relationship between Washington and the Continental Army?" Or, "The Battle of Bunker Hill" can be questioned as, "What was the Battle of Bunker Hill?" Or, "Where was it?" You should write these questions on a separate sheet of paper for later review. Now is the time to actually read the material. As you read, try to find the answers to your questions. If you find that your questions were not broad enough, feel free to add questions about anything you find important. Highlight or underline the answers to your questions within the text. Be judicious in highlighting. Often, students get carried away with fluorescent markers. If this is you, you may want to stick with underlining. Immediately after reading a section or subsection, take a moment and recite your question aloud. You may want to read it in your head, but the effort it takes to read aloud will help ingrain and focus your understanding. Answer the question in your own words, without the help of the text, and make sure you understand your answer. If you find that you are missing information, reread the text. If you still do not understand, follow up as best you can with additional research or jot down a question for your instructor. When you have read the entire chapter, review your questions from the separate sheet of paper. Again, answer in your own words, but refer to your highlighted parts if stuck. At the conclusion of the chapter, you will have a good idea of its structure, have created questions for a study guide, and underlined or highlighted relevant information. Even if you still have lingering questions for the next day's class, you will have interacted and demonstrated a desire to learn, and find that you gained much more understanding than simply running your eyes over the text.
Refer to this PowerPoint or to the SQ3R how-to video as often as you need to. Keep these reading strategies fresh in your mind and use them often. Thank you.